it's Suad who chose the first three speakers. All happen to be men and all happen to be European and British defending Saudi Arabia. But now we have Saudi ladies and academics who are going to also speak as well. And it's my pleasure to invite Madawi Al-Rashid, who is a professor of anthropology of religion at King's College London. She grew up in Saudi Arabia and studied at Cambridge. She specializes in history, society, religion, politics in Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East. She has written a lot of books on Christian minorities, Arab migration to Britain, political Islam, and transnational religious networks. She is the author of many books, as I've said, and it gives me great pleasure now to ask Madawi Al-Rashid to now take the floor.
Thank you, Lord Ahmed. Let me just begin by saying that I'm astonished at the hostility about holding a session like this one on Saudi Arabia in a country that values debate. We've heard that from three speakers. But I would like to say that Saudi Arabia divides opinions. And let me start by a little historical note. Since the discovery of oil, Saudi Arabia relied on a large number of Western commentators, apologists, and journalists who acted as brokers and mediators, a bridge between an archaic political system that hides behind Islam to ascertain its piety, uniqueness, and other exceptionalism, or so-called exceptionalism. Those commentators paint a rosy picture of a kingdom regarded as a special configuration, outside history and time, with a conservative and backward population, and endowed with an enlightened leadership that needs to be nourished, protected, and indulged as it served our interest. And here I'm talking as a British citizen. Those apologists have painted a picture of Saudi Arabia that is rather schizophrenic. We have a country that is blessed, in inverted commas, by two contradictory forces: an enlightened avant-garde leadership on the one hand, and a so-called backward, conservative, tribal, and even religiously radical population on the other hand. The conclusion follows. We in the West need the former, i.e. the leadership, to tighten the reins on this unruly, savage population. I would like to highlight the fallacy of some myths that have been circulated by the three speakers. The first myth, that Saudi Arabia is an Islamic state. It is a myth, and I've written a book about that called Contesting the Saudi State. Please do consult that book to know exactly what I mean. Saudi Arabia as an Islamic state is a fallacy. And therefore, the conclusion comes, it is governed by the limitation of religion and Sharia. This Sharia that frightens people here in the West is what Saudi Arabia has. And it is a flag that is raised in the face of those who ask for human rights in Saudi Arabia. Let me tell you that Islam in Saudi Arabia is subservient to the leadership and has been so since 1927. In fact, the state uses religion either to mark its piety when it suits the leadership or the so-called modernity. Religion is not an independent variable shaping Saudi society and government. Religion is used and abused to mask the abuse of human rights and restrictions on civil liberties. Under the guise of the so-called Islamic law, under the guise of Sharia, people are held, abused, tortured in Saudi prisons. Let me say, there's another myth that I heard today, that the myth says what is good for us here in Britain or in Paris or in New York is not and cannot be ever good for Saudis. this relativism that amounts to nihilist cultural relativism is no longer acceptable in the 21st century. It is a mask that those apologists hide behind, and it doesn't work anymore. This relativism is not going to be possible to invoke in the future. How can we torture prisoners in a Saudi jail and say that is okay, it's their Sharia, it's their Islam, but it's not possible for us here to do in Britain? Why is it possible to ban academics from publishing their work or speaking or even writing a petition? That can be banned in Saudi Arabia, but we don't accept it here. How can we ban someone from the basic right of movement? Confiscate their passports. We can do that in Saudi Arabia because it's our culture, but we can't do it here in Britain. Let me move to the third myth. The myth of the desert tribal democracy. We've already heard the word democracy invoked. And we have examples. The open princely councils, so-called majlis, as islands of consultation and democracy. Or let's not use the word democracy, let's use our local indigenous term, shura. And I know the difference between Saad and Ahmed here. This has been exposed. As well, as we all know, decision-making in Saudi Arabia is restricted to a handful of princes who don't agree or consult each other, let alone consult society or important groups in society. The fourth myth: Saudi rulers are progressive while society is backward. I've heard this so many times, and I've heard it just now. In any society, I agree, there are conservative elements and more progressive elements. There are multiple orientations. But the difference is that in Saudi Arabia, we have one exceptionalism, and that is the state has privileged the radical elements throughout history and at different historical periods. And in fact, if we look at Islamic history, it is the only state that is founded on radicalism. Radicalism is the religion of the state. And throughout Islamic history, we've never had this. It's an aberration. Today, Saudi Arabia is trying to shed the legacy of the past and present itself as a champion of religious reform and moderation. Let me take the 3 points. First, human rights, then civil liberties, and finally, terrorism. International and Arab local human rights organizations have exposed Saudi abuses. I'm not going to go through the list. The Saudis claim that, yes, they have excesses, but nothing like the excesses of other Arab regimes. And here we fall into the fallacy of numbers. It means that if a regime tortures 100 people, it's okay, because the next-door neighbor tortures 1,000 prisoners. And therefore, that is okay. We don't want to bring out that. And here I'm talking about British citizens as well who live in Saudi Arabia. There are 30,000 British expatriates. And on one occasion, I was told by a British official that we know that our own citizens are tortured in Saudi Arabia, but we try to deal with it our own way. I said, well, fine, great. Oil has allowed the carrots to grow hand in hand with the sticks. And 2 human rights organizations were mentioned that were set up in Saudi Arabia after 9/11. These ones I call gingos. What do I mean? I mean governmental, non-governmental organizations. That means that they are set up by the government. Their members are appointed by the government, and therefore they do not have any kind of independent status. And yes, of course, they would take out the case of a woman who's slapped by her husband or had her head smashed against the wall. Yes, they will do that, but they will not take the case of someone, an academic who is picked out of his office in college and taken to the Secret Service, imprisoned for several months, then released and deprived of freedom of movement because he wrote a letter to say that Saudi prisons are appalling.
I'm chairing it, please, Daniel. When you chair meetings...
So the Gingos, we are told that the Gingos are NGOs. The Gingos are not NGOs.
Okay.
On terrorism, Saudi Arabia adopts double standards in its treatment of terrorism. Jihad, the famous or infamous word, at home is haram, forbidden. But jihad abroad